It was a Tuesday, which meant Fritz was in the kitchen performing his weekly sorcery with goose liver, Madeira wine, and a copper saucepan that probably had more personality than most of our neighbors. I was at my desk pretending to look busy, with some expense reports when the bell rang, not the phone, the front doorbell, and not in the casual, oops, wrong building sort of way. This was the kind of ring that made it clear whoever was behind it wasn't leaving without dropping some kind of bomb, metaphorical or otherwise. "Archie," came the voice from the upstairs landing, deep and irritated like a bear being disturbed mid-hibernation. That was the door. "I heard, sir," I called back, rising. "Unless you'd like me to install a dumbwaiter so you can field visitors from the second floor?" No answer. I took that as permission to do my job. When I opened the door, the man standing there was dressed like a banker and sweating like a baker. Dark three-piece suit, pinstripe tie, shoes that probably cost more than my last 3 dates combined, but he looked like he hadn't eaten. Solid meal in a week, Mr. Wolfe?" he asked, glancing past me into the hallway as if expecting to spot the big man himself lumbering down the stairs with a monocle and a meat cleaver. "Not even close," I said, "but you're halfway lucky. I'm Archie Goodwin. You can try your luck with me, and if you're interesting enough, I'll toss your case up to the mountain." He hesitated, then stepped inside. "My name is Lionel Jessup. I manage L'Empirene." I didn't blink, but I knew the name. L'Empirene wasn't just a restaurant. It was the restaurant. People booked tables there the way most folks plan. Funerals weeks in advance, and with the hope they wouldn't regret the expense. The head chef, Anton Roll, was more famous than most movie stars and twice as obnoxious, if gossip pages were to be believed. "And," I asked, hanging his coat without being asked, "are you trying to book a table for Mr. Wolfe? I should warn you, we're allergic to foam." "It's about Chef Roll," he said. "He collapsed during prep 2 nights ago. Poisoning. Not fatal, fortunately, but enough to send him into seizures and panic. Panic's not usually fatal either," I said. "But go on. He swears someone's trying to kill him. He's demanding answers, but he refuses to call the police. He says if word gets out, it'll destroy the restaurant. Sounds like someone sprinkled drama into his consomme." He didn't laugh. I gave him credit. "Mr. Goodwin," he said carefully, "the chef believes it was an inside job. Someone he knows. Someone in his inner circle. And to make things worse, something's gone missing from the wine cellar, a bottle of La Tache, 1937, worth north of 20 grand. The staff swears it was their last week. Let me guess," I said. "Chef Roll thinks the poisoning and the stolen wine are connected." He nodded. "He wants someone discreet and thorough, someone with a reputation for results." Mr. Wolfe's name came up from a sommelier we both know. "Said you solved something involving black truffles and a fraudulent import license." I groaned. That truffle case had ended with Wolfe refusing to eat mushrooms for a month, which had nearly driven Fritz to an early grave. But Jessup was already reaching into his breast pocket and pulling out a check. I didn't look at the number. "Yet, you'll want to speak with him directly," I said. But be warned, Wolfe doesn't leave the house, not even for poison, let alone soup. If he takes the case, you'll be doing a lot of commuting. Jessup nodded again, like a man surrendering to gravity. I understand. I led him to the office. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, legs splayed, chin tucked into his chest, and a glare loaded in both barrels. But he listened. He didn't ask questions until Jessup was done. Then he uttered a single word. Why? Jessup blinked. Why? What? Why should I care? Wolfe said. If a temperamental prima donna chef chokes on his own marinade? And why, in heaven's name, should I allow the stench of kitchen politics to breach my home? Because, Jessup said, Chef Rolfe thinks he knows who did it. But he won't say, not yet. Not until someone unbiased has looked into it, he said. He said if he speaks too soon, he'll tip the wrong hand. I saw Wolfe's eyes flicker. That got his attention, even if it only pulled his pulse up to mildly intrigued. There's a roster, Jessup added. People with access. 5 names. All of them with reasons to hate Roe or profit from his fall. And what do you expect me to do? Wolfe asked. Taste sauces and sniff corks. You do what you do, Jessup said. Mr. Goodwin handles the legwork. You determine who nearly killed the most arrogant chef in Manhattan. Wolfe closed his eyes for a long, contemplative breath. Then, leave the roster with Mr. Goodwin. Return tomorrow at 11. If I've not discarded the matter by then, you will have your answer. Jessup looked relieved, which meant he was either desperate or stupid, or both. He handed me a folded sheet of paper and left like a man who'd just dodged an exploding sofa. I watched the door close, then turned to Wolfe. Why'd you take it? I asked. I haven't, he replied. But you will. His silence confirmed it. That, and the way he reached over to ring for Fritz. Tell him, Wolfe said without opening his eyes, to prepare nothing with vinegar, nutmeg, or cream frakie. I do not want reminders. I unfolded the roster and took a look at the names. 5 suspects, 1 arrogant victim, and the stink of poison hanging in the air. Looks like we had ourselves a recipe for trouble. I'll say this for Lionel Jessup, he didn't take Wolfe's maybe as a no. And he showed up the next morning at 11 sharp, looking less wilted, but no less anxious. Fritz nearly tripped over himself trying to prevent the man from stepping too far into the hall, as if a restaurant manager might contaminate the parquet flooring. Wolfe, of course, was already in his chair immovable, unreadable, and already halfway through his bottle of beer, which I had opened and placed on his desk exactly 2 minutes prior. Jessup sat in the red chair, clasped his hands like a preacher, on loan from the anxiety ward, and waited. Wolfe didn't speak immediately. He let silence build like rising steam, and when the man finally shifted uncomfortably, Wolfe gave him the smallest nod of approval. Mr. Goodwin has provided me with the names, he said, voice flat. Let us see what stock we have to work with. I'd already read through the sheet twice the night before, and it was a lovely buffet of resentment. I recited from memory, Suspect 1, Elaine Morter, sous chef, 7 years under Rull, rumored to be gunning for his job. She is the only One who tasted the same mushroom blend he did, but didn't keel over. Either lucky or careful. Wolfe gave a grunt that might have been intrigue. Number 2, Jasper Quam, pastry chef and resident sugar sculptor. Friendly with the press, to friendly if you ask Raoul. He's been accidentally letting slip menu plans to a rival publication. Jessup winced at that. I moved on. 3. Victor Delman, wine director. Supposedly he controls the cellar. Like it's Fort Knox, but that bottle of Lotach Wall Stout on his watch. He claims it was miscounted. But come on, for, I continued, is Delilah Ames. Hostess and front of house coordinator. She dated Raoul last year. It ended badly. Word is she's since been recommending rival venues to VIPs who ask. And 5, I finished, is Clay Porter, line cook and nephew of the restaurant's silent investor. He's untouchable by contract, but Raoul hates him, calls him a culinary delinquent with a meat cleaver. Jessup looked like he needed a nap or a stiff drink. Wolfe, as expected, didn't blink. You say the chef suspects one of them? Wolfe asked. Jessup nodded. He believes only one of them had both opportunity and motive. But he won't say who. Bah. Wolfe leaned back an inch. Cowardice. Typical. I had a question of my own. Why not just fire them all? Jessup answered. He tried that 2 years ago when someone leaked a risotto recipe. The media ran wild with chef rules soup Nazi headlines. Our bookings took a hit. And frankly, the investor Clay's uncle is keeping a tight leash. No scandal, no firing squad. Quiet resolution only. I let out a low whistle. So you want the truth, but not the fallout. Wolfe shut his eyes. Then you require leverage, not just evidence. Jessup blinked. Yes, exactly. That was all Wolfe needed. He rang the bell for Fritz. Mr. Goodwin will begin at once, Wolfe said. He will visit the restaurant, interview the suspects under some plausible pretext, and return before dinner. I do not want the odor of charred ego interrupting my digestion. I gave Jessup the look that said I'd see him out, and together we headed for the door outside. Jessup handed me a sleek black folder with floor plans, contact info, and a one-day guest pass for Lynpirene. Officially, he said, you're conducting a service audit on behalf of a high-profile donor considering investment. No names, no fuss. Got it? I said. If anyone asks, I'm an invisible man with an expensive appetite. As he left, I glanced down at the folder. A small sticky note was attached to the last page. In sharp, looping ink it read, Chef suspects Elaine, claims she's been experimenting behind his back, refuses to elaborate further. Well. I went back inside, showed Wolfe the note, and he merely grunted again, which for him was basically an aria of interest. I'll start with Elaine, I said, pocketing the note. She's either brewing ideas or brewing poison. Observe, Archie, Wolfe murmured, but do not presume. In kitchens, egos are more volatile than gas stoves. Touch nothing. Smell everything. I grinned. You should embroider that on a napkin. Wolfe closed his eyes again, and I left. The brownstone. By 1:30, I was walking into Lempirene under the guise of a consultant with expensive tastes and vague intentions. The staff didn't bat an eye, though Elaine Mortar gave me a long, squinting stare as I was ushered past the gleaming marble host stand. She had the lean, hungry look of someone who'd spent years being second best and was just waiting for the first to slip. Her knives were clean, her jacket pressed, and her smile non-existent. I made a mental note to watch how she moved when no one was watching. If Wolfe was right, and let's face it, he usually is, the game was about to get spicy. If there's one thing I've learned tailing cooks, barons, and Broadway wannabes over the years, it's this: any room where ego outweighs oxygen will have secrets marinating beneath the surface. Lempirene was no exception. The place had ambience dripping off the walls like hollandaise sauce, and the staff moved with the synchronized anxiety of people who knew one wrong move could cost them their jobs or a dressing down in front of a dozen diners my cover was holding. Prospective investors' agents sounded vague enough to justify questions, and vague enough to avoid too many in return. Jessup had arranged for me to observe quietly, get a tour, and request brief feedback interviews with select staff. Under the guise of understanding operations, it was just fancy code for nose around without a badge. My first target was Elaine Mortar, the sous chef role supposedly had pegged as a saboteur. She stood at the stainless steel prep table like a soldier, sharp jaw, sharper gaze, and not a flicker of patience for nonsense. I gave her a smile. She gave me a stare. If I'd worn a tie, she'd have sliced it with her eyes. "Miss Mortar," I said, projecting just enough charm to keep from sounding like a clipboard cop. "Mind a quick chat? I'm here observing on behalf of a party interested in the place. He's keen on how leadership works in a high-pressure kitchen." Her lips moved, though it barely counted as a smile. "You'll want Anton for that. He's unavailable." "As I understand it," I said, "which makes you the next best authority." She nodded once, tossed her knife on the counter with perfect control, and stepped aside. I leaned against a pantry rack, keeping my posture casual. "So," I said, "Chef Roll goes down from suspected poisoning. You're the closest one in the room. He accuses someone inside the house. You surprised?" "No," she said. No hesitation. "Anton runs his kitchen like a kingdom. Every empire breeds conspirators. Were you one of them?" "Not unless ambition counts as treason." "I hear he thinks you were experimenting behind his back." "I was." She said it without shame. "There's no growth in stillness. He wants blind loyalty. I want progress. That's not sabotage." I let that sit. But the mushrooms, I plated my dish myself. Same mushroom mix he used, same sauce. If someone poisoned his, they didn't touch mine. Maybe they knew better. Or maybe Anton's just paranoid. You ever meet him? Not yet. Then don't judge me until you do. I filed that away. Elaine was combative, but clear. If she was guilty, she had nerves of steel and a poker face to match. But she also hadn't asked who I really was. That meant she either didn't care or already knew. Next on my hit list was Jasper Quam, the pastry chef. I found him in his nook of the kitchen, elbow deep in spun sugar and classical music. He greeted me like I was an old friend. "You must be the investor's guy," he said, offering a hand covered in powdered sugar. "I'm Jasper. You're just in time to see my lemon meringue torches." We served them with a microburst of orange blossom gas at the table. "Sounds lethal," I said. He laughed, "Only in concept." I leaned in. "What about actual danger? Like, say, poisoning?" The smile faltered. "Is that what they're saying happened to Anton?" "Officially, no. Unofficially, loud yes." He shook his head. "If that's true, I'm shocked and mildly impressed. It's hard to slip anything past Anton. He's obsessive. Obsession can blind people. Ever seen him clash with Elaine?" He looked around, lowered his voice. "Elaine's brilliant, but they've been at odds for a year. He shut down her fermentation program, said it clashed with his brand. She called him a dinosaur. And you?" I stay in my sugar-coated lane, he said with a grin. "I've got no beef with anyone, and no one hates me enough to poison a soup just to frame me. Any idea who might?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Delilah's still bitter. And Victor? He acts like he owns the place. If something's missing, start in the wine cellar." I thanked him and moved on to Delilah Ames. She was at the front desk, running seating charts like a stage manager during Tech Week. Sharp features, sharp voice, and sharp memory for who tipped and who didn't. When I introduced myself, she barely raised an eyebrow. "Another spy for the moneybags," she said. "Are you here to ask about the wine or the poison?" I blinked. "You tell me." "I didn't poison Anton, if that's what you're fishing for," she said. "I've got better ways to get even." "Even for what?" She smirked. "He dumped me for a food critic. Said it was a professional move." I said he could professionally get stuffed. And now I smile at guests, pretend I'm thrilled to be here, and watch the ship sink from the inside. I liked her honesty. I didn't like the edge in her voice when she said sink. Delilah didn't strike me as murderous, but she did strike me as someone who would sabotage a man's career from within. That bottle of La Tach might not be the only thing missing from the cellar. I left her and headed down to the storage level to find Victor Delman, the wine director. He was inspecting crates with a flashlight and a scowl. His vibe was pure accountant meets sommelier tight, exact, and already defensive. "Mr. Delman," I said, flashing the guest pass, just looking for insight about the stolen wine, among other things. "I don't know who took it. Inventory was accurate until a week ago. Then it's gone. Probably an inside job. Anton thinks it ties to the incident. You disagree?" "I think it's unrelated, unless someone wanted to make it look connected." "And what about Clay?" Victor snorted. "Clay's too dumb to pull off a wine theft. But he's arrogant. Thinks being the investor's nephew makes him untouchable." "Does it?" "It makes him reckless," he said. "Anton wanted him fired twice. Got blocked. Anyone else got problems with Roll." Victor leaned against a rack. "Everyone does. He's a genius, sure, but he uses people up like produce. Elaine resents him. Delilah's bitter. Jasper's too smart to show it. But He's tired of being passed over. And you? I just want order, which we don't have, thanks to this circus. The final act of my kitchen tour was Clay Porter himself. I found him outside, behind the service entrance, smoking something probably not legal in Manhattan. He looked barely 30, all swagger and sarcasm. "You the guy looking under rugs," he said, exhaling a plume of herbal philosophy. "That's me." "Well, I didn't spike the soup," he said. "I can barely boil water. Maybe you paid someone else to." He laughed. If I wanted Anton gone, I'd let his ego do the work. That man's one tantrum away from cancel culture. You have access to the wine cellar, not since Victor locked it tighter than Fort Knox. Why? La Tâche, 1937. Ring a bell? His grin faded just enough. "I know what it's worth. But no, I didn't touch it. I've got expensive taste, not a death wish." That was all I needed from Clay. I walked back through the kitchen one more time, letting the flavors, faces, and fractured egos settle into a neat file in my head. Everyone had something to lose, and some of them might be willing to make someone else lose more. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was already mid-sip on his beer, and Fritz was seasoning duck confit with surgical precision. I gave my report, every word. Wolfe listened, nodded once, and reached for the phone. "Saul," he said when the line connected. "Come. Bring gloves. Something here doesn't smell like food." The thing about Saul Panzer is that if Wolfe sends him, it means one of two things. Either I've missed something, or something's been moved that no one's supposed to notice. In this case, Wolfe hadn't said either aloud, but his tone was enough to let me know that a piece of the puzzle had slid an inch out of place, and he was ready to apply pressure. Saul arrived that evening in a suit that looked like it cost less than the cab fare, and carried the quiet intensity of a man who could walk into a locked vault and leave with a whisper. Wolfe gave him no dramatic monologue, no parade of suspects, just a nod toward the folder Jessup had left and a single instruction: the cellar. Check for evidence of forced access, and smell the corks. The next morning, while Wolfe settled into his orchids and I attacked my second cup of coffee like it owed me money, Saul returned with the face of a man who hadn't slept but had found something worth staying up for. He sat across from me, unwrapped a cloth bundle, and laid out 3 items: a broken cork, a fingerprint-smudged glass pipette, and what looked like a thumb-sized shard of dark green glass. Delman was right. Saul said inventory was off. The bottle of La Tâche wasn't just missing, it was tampered with. I found this cork stuffed behind a radiator pipe in the cellar, half-burnt, probably meant to be destroyed. Whoever took the bottle didn't drink it. They used it. Used it how? I asked. Look closer, he said, tapping the cork. See? The puncture holes. This wasn't pulled with a standard corkscrew. Someone injected something into it. I looked again. Sure enough, faint needle marks ran at odd angles across the cork's surface. So whoever stole it didn't just swipe. A collector's prize, they weaponized it. Saul nodded. And this, he added, pointing to the pipette, was tucked behind a bottle of plum brandy. still had traces of mushroom residue in it. Not culinary grade either. Wild. Could be toxic depending on how it was handled. I felt the pieces tilt in my head. Someone had stolen a 5-figure wine bottle, hollowed it like a science project, and refilled it with something designed to make a man twitch and foam like a soda can in a blender. Then they'd served it up to Chef Anton Roll, under the guise of hospitality or revenge. Either way, it wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was precision, personal. What about the glass? I asked. Different bottle, smashed and discarded behind the trash bins. No label, but it's not restaurant stock. Wrong shape. Could be a decoy. Wolfe, who had remained silent through the exchange, finally spoke. Mr. Goodwin, your thoughts? I leaned back. If someone laced the wine and returned it to the cellar after the fact, it narrows our window. And our suspect, only Victor, Elaine, and Clay had consistent cellar access. Delilah could have arranged distraction. Jasper could have known the bottle's value, but handling wine like this, that takes guts and knowledge. Elaine's got the chemistry, I said, ticking names off with my finger. Victor has the access. Clay has the motive plus arrogance. Jasper doesn't fit the profile, but he's clever, and Delilah might have facilitated it. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Yet none of them benefit directly. The restaurant's collapse would damage all equally. Unless, I said, the point wasn't to destroy the restaurant, just the man. That got a grunt. Progress. At 11 sharp, Jessup returned for the daily inquisition. I laid out the items Saul had recovered, watching his face twist as I walked him through the implications. When I explained the cork's injection marks, his throat clicked audibly. That bottle was meant to be gifted, he said quietly. Anton was going to serve it during a press tasting next week. Make a statement about returning to classics. Well, I said. Someone made a statement, all right, Wolfe asked. The next question with surgical precision. Who packed the wine for transport? Victor. Jessup answered. But Anton always insisted on final inspection. That bottle never left his oversight. Yet he drank from it. Jessup nodded. 2 nights before the incident, he claimed he was preparing his palate. I thought he meant tasting. Now I wonder if it was bait. Wolfe closed his eyes, digesting. Someone wanted Anton publicly humiliated, not dead, but incapacitated, sick enough to suffer, not enough to perish. That's twisted, I said. It's human, Wolfe countered, and calculated. I left shortly after to pay another visit to Victor Delman. If anyone knew how long that bottle had sat uncorked, it was him. I found Victor in the middle of restocking Reds, his mood darker than the cellar lighting. I didn't waste time. Victor, I said, who last touched the latch before it disappeared. He looked up. Anton. Are you sure? He inspected it 3 days before the poisoning. Handled it himself. Told me to keep it chilled and untouched. I logged it, and yet it vanished. I told you. I don't know how. The cellar's locked and coded. No one else has the pass except me, and he stopped. And I prompted. His eyes narrowed. And Clay. His uncle demanded access 6 months ago. Said it was part of his oversight duties. Double quotes bingo. Double quotes. Did Clay ever talk about the bottle? Victor hesitated. Only once. Said it was wasted on critics. Suggested pouring something cheaper and keeping the original. Charming. I left him pacing by the Chianti and headed out to find Clay. This time I didn't wait for Jessop's pretense or Wolfe's instructions. Clay was lounging in the bar area, legs crossed, sipping what I hoped was soda. I dropped into the seat across from him and gave him the kind of look that wipes smirks clean. "Tell me about the wine," I said. He blinked. "What wine?" "La Tache. The one you joked about swapping." His eyes darted. Just a flick. Then the grin reassembled itself. "Oh, that," he said. "I was kidding. Everyone knows Anton treats wine like relics. It was a joke. Some joke. Someone poisoned it." Clay's face dropped its last layer of smug. "That's not no one was supposed to get hurt," he said to quickly. I leaned in. "What did you do?" "I didn't poison it," he said. I swapped the bottles for a prank. Anton humiliated me last month in front of investors. I wanted him to sweat, so I took the bottle, emptied half, filled it with vinegar and mushroom broth. Nasty, but not dangerous. Where's the bottle now? I threw it out after. Or I thought I did. I stood. You might want to call a lawyer, because someone used your prank as cover, and that makes you their perfect little decoy. Back at the brownstone, I relayed everything to Wolfe, who now sat upright in his chair, eyes narrowed. "Someone exploited Clay's idiocy," he muttered. "Used the switch as an opportunity to test a method. Not kill. Send a message. To who? To Anton. And to us." He rang for Fritz. "Dinner at 7, Wolfe said. "We summon them all tomorrow." By the next morning, Wolfe had officially declared the brownstone under siege, which meant no interruptions, no orchids, and absolutely no guests outside of suspects or trusted operatives. That put Fritz in a near state of mourning, since he'd spent half the morning prepping a duck roulette that was now exiled to the coal shelf. Wolfe's appetite would return, he assured us, when the air stopped stinking of intrigue. Until then, the only thing he'd be chewing on was motive. At precisely 11. Saul Panzer returned with a folder thick enough to anchor a lifeboat. While Wolfe reviewed the pages in silence, I skimmed the highlights, credit reports, social media activity, job contracts, legal agreements, everything short of blood types. Saul had outdone himself. Again, Delilah's been transferring small sums to an unlisted account, he said, tapping a sheet. Not illegal, but unusual. The account's owned by someone named V. Dorman. Might be a shell. Victor Delman? I asked. Possibly, or a relative. Still digging. Wolfe grunted, which meant interesting, but not conclusive. What? About Elaine? I asked. Clean, Saul said. No debts, no erratic calls, no sudden purchases. But she has been meeting off hours with someone from a rival kitchen. Gideon Strauss. Used to be Rule's protege. They fell out last year. Over what? Wolfe asked, not looking up. Creative control. Strauss claims Anton stole a concept for a tasting sequence and refused to give credit. Elaine's been seen with him 3 times this month. Could be personal, I said. Could be plotting. Wolfe said nothing. He turned the page. Saul continued, as for Claywell, you already saw what a blessing he is to poor decision-making. But he's also got access to a secure messaging app, typically used by folks with something to hide. 2 of the contacts were burner IDs. No names. And Victor? I asked. Clean record. But he recently appraised several high-value bottles for private sale. One of them matched the stolen La Touch's serial code. I looked up. You're saying Victor tried to sell it? No proof of follow-through, Saul said. But he logged it with an auction broker in Geneva, under a pseudonym. That was enough to make Wolfe close the file. He placed his fingertips together, leaned back, and let out a long breath that meant he was assembling pieces on the inside. Then came the knock. Wolfe gave me the usual glare equal parts answer the door and curse the world. So I opened it. Chef Anton Roll was standing on the stoop. He looked, well, like a man who'd tasted his own funeral and didn't care for the seasoning. Hollow-eyed, overdressed in a 3-piece charcoal suit, and sporting a tan that looked store-bought and 3 days expired. Behind him trailed Lionel Jessup, less surprised to see me than I was to see Roll. Mr. Goodwin, Roll said with that clipped, theatrical accent TV chefs love. You'll excuse the intrusion, but I'm owed clarity, and silence has become intolerable. You're early, I said. Wolfe doesn't receive suspects until the stage is set. I'm not a suspect, he snapped. Suit yourself. Come in. Wolfe didn't rise, of course, but his eyes lifted like a security camera coming to life. Jessup settled in beside me. Roll stayed standing, like a visiting general. He looked down at Wolfe with something between disdain and desperation. I want names, he said. I want to know which one of those ingrates tried to kill me. None of them, Wolfe replied. Silence. Roll blinked. What? I don't believe the intention was to kill you, Wolfe said. The dosage was insufficient, the timing imprecise, and the method flawed for assassination. You were meant to suffer, not die. That's absurd. It's human, Wolfe replied, and it tells us more than a motive. It tells us about pride. Roll was already pacing. My reputation is worth more than any of theirs combined, he muttered. I gave them careers. Elaine would be burning scallops in Jersey without me. Yet she met with Gideon Strauss, I said, 3 times. Privately, discussing a project. She's free to leave. But not to betray me, Wolfe interjected. And betrayal cuts deeper when it's subtle. Poison in the wine. Public humiliation without a fatality. A slow burn. That was the goal. Whose goal? Roll snapped. Wolfe stared at him. I intend to find out. But you've made it more difficult by keeping your suspicions to yourself. Roll shifted. You think I know who did it. I think you suspect, and you're afraid of being wrong. Wolfe was right. Roll didn't argue. He left 5 minutes later, tension snapping. Off his shoulders like a dropped tray. Jessup remained behind, shoulders slumped. That man's held together with bitterness, he muttered. Bitterness, Wolfe said, is often mistaken for flavor. I returned to the restaurant that afternoon under the excuse of reviewing fire compliance protocols. Delilah spotted me immediately and offered a smile so thin it could have been sliced with a butter knife. We're all behaving, she said. Mostly. I didn't reply. I wanted to see the wine cellar again. I told Victor I needed to compare inventory logs. He let me in reluctantly, inside. The air was cool, dry, and heavy with distrust. I scanned the racks, the floor tiles, the temperature gauges. Nothing was physically out of place until I noticed the frame on the wall. An old photo roll and Strauss, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like thieves with a shared secret. Odd place for a photo, considering the feud. I turned to Victor. Why's that still here? He looked over. Anton never took it down. He said it reminded him what ambition costs. I made a note. Later that evening, Wolfe gathered all suspects to the brownstone. He did not explain. He did not offer snacks. He simply said, tomorrow, 11 sharp, my office. Then he turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, ask Saul to review Strauss's financials. We need to know if he's bankrolled by anyone. Inside that kitchen. Understood, I said, and prepare the chairs. I will not stand while they lie to me. The next morning dawned cool and grey, as if Manhattan itself knew Nero Wolfe was in strategy mode. Inside the brownstone, the temperature wasn't much warmer. Fritz, normally the ambassador of Com, was rattled enough by the upcoming office, gathering that he nearly oversalted Wolfe's eggs. Saul Panzer had already sent a message confirming what Wolfe had predicted. Gideon Strauss, former protege and current culinary nemesis of Anton Roll, had received 2 separate wire transfers in the last 3 weeks each from an account connected to Delilah Ames. They weren't huge sums, but they weren't pocket change either. Wolfe read the confirmation, set the telegram aside like it was a chess piece he no longer needed, and began making verbal preparations for what he called the structured application of pressure. Wolfe didn't believe in confrontation unless it was calibrated. No raised voices, no drama, no shock value, just quiet, unrelenting logic. He sat in his chair by 10:30, freshly groomed, fed, and still refusing coffee on the grounds that adrenaline served better on mornings like this. I adjusted the chairs, placed the extra coasters, and made sure Fritz knew not to knock unless the building was on fire, and even then, to reconsider. At 11 sharp, they arrived. One by one, Elaine Mortar, the sous chef with ambition carved into her cheekbones, came first, dressed sharp, arms folded, and jaw locked like she was preparing to slice garlic with her molars. She didn't ask questions. She just sat. Then came Victor Delman, holding his composure the way a waiter balances a tray, steady but tentative. He nodded politely, which Wolfe didn't acknowledge. Next, Jasper Kwan, the pastry prince, still wearing cologne I couldn't name and probably couldn't afford. He offered everyone a greeting as if this was brunch. Delilah arrived shortly after, eyes cold, lipstick meticulous. Her blouse screamed wealth, but her posture screamed don't. Push me. Last was Clay Porter, late by 5 minutes and unapologetic about it. He looked bored, which for him was probably the closest he got to nervous. Wolfe didn't speak until they were all seated, the room quiet, and the tension stitched tight enough to bounce a quarter. "You are here," he began, "because one of you committed a cowardly act, layered in deception and flavored with ego. That alone does not offend me. What offends me is the presumption that such an act could go unnoticed in my domain." That got a few blinks. Jasper shifted. Elaine scratched her temple with deliberate restraint. Wolfe continued. Chef Anton Roll was not poisoned with intent to kill. He was humiliated. A calculated dosage, administered through tampered wine stolen and altered under the nose of Mr. Dillman. A performance designed to suggest incompetence. But it was not incompetence. It was orchestration. He turned slightly to Victor. The bottle of La Tâche was appraised for auction. By you. Victor tensed, but said nothing. Not sold, Wolfe said. Not withdrawn, simply valued. Which suggests curiosity rather than intent. I'll leave it at that, for now. Then to Clay. You, in your spectacular idiocy, swapped a valuable bottle as a prank. You admitted this. Your access and arrogance provided the perfect cover. But you lacked the knowledge to pull off the poison. Clay opened his mouth, thought better of it, and stayed silent. Progress. Wolfe's gaze turned to Delilah next. You have been transferring funds to Gideon Strauss regularly. When asked why, you'll claim it was personal, perhaps even romantic. But the timing aligns too closely with Chef Rule's incident. Delilah didn't blink. I don't deny it. No, Wolfe said. You wouldn't. But you didn't deliver the poison. You facilitated the access. A partner always requires an opening. Now to Elaine. Your meetings with Strauss 3 this month. Off books, after hours. Strauss has reason to despise Roll. So do you. You believed your contributions were stifled. Your growth arrested. Your loyalty wasted. Elaine folded her arms tighter. I had every right to leave if I wanted. But I didn't poison him. No, Wolfe said. You didn't. You were being recruited, and you were tempted, but not careless, which left one person. Wolfe turned, finally, to Jasper. The pastry chef's confident mask cracked just barely. Wolfe's voice lowered. You had no debts, no grudges, but you had proximity, precision, and access to ingredients no one else recognized. Mushroom residue was found in a discarded pipette. You maintain control of the garnish station. You frequently test flavors, including mushroom reductions, for balance. Jasper opened his mouth. That's not. Wolfe raised a hand. You were loyal once, but you were tired of being passed over. Tired of being cute and clever, but never critical. Strauss offered you more than praise. He offered a position. You couldn't refuse, so you agreed to soften the fall. Not kill Anton, just bruise him. Shake his throne. Jasper's hands gripped the armrests. You can't prove that. No, Wolfe said. Not in court. But this is not court. This is conscience. He leaned forward slightly, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of shouting. You used Clay's wine prank to deliver a diluted dose of Cortinarius aurelinus, the deadly webcap. In small amounts, it mimics food poisoning. In large amounts, kidney failure. You calculated poorly. You underestimated Anton's tolerance, or overestimated your subtlety. Either way, you failed, and now you are here. Jasper's lips parted. No defense came out. Wolfe rang the bell. Fritz entered, carrying a tray with 6 glasses of water. No wine, Wolfe said. We've had enough drama. I watched Jasper's shoulders sink, not dramatically, just enough to admit what he wouldn't say. Saul stepped from the hallway, having been listening from the den. Wolfe nodded once. You'll escort Mr. Quam out, he said. The others may go. No one argued. As the room emptied, Wolfe reached for his beer. The silence returned like an old friend. You're not calling the police? I asked. He will confess, Wolfe said, eventually, to Rull, perhaps, or to Strauss, if he's wise. But confession will not undo the damage. This was not about justice. This was about control. He sipped. Anton has learned he is mortal. That will suffice. I whistled. And you? Satisfied. Wolfe closed his eyes. Appetite returns. You'd think that after a showdown like that, Wolfe exposing the inside of someone's moral pantry, for all to see, we'd have fireworks, fists flying, someone sobbing, maybe even a threat or two to call their high-priced lawyer. But no, Jasper Quant just stood there like a burnt sulfur, deflated, hollow, and somehow still sweet on the outside. Saul took him out with the same professional quiet he brings to everything, and by the time the others filtered out behind him, the air in the office felt like it had been scrubbed. Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. He reached for the beer I had uncapped without instruction and took a sip like a man whose appetite was returning precisely on schedule. Fritz appeared at the edge of the room, carrying a tray with his usual confident silence, and set it down. Without comment, roast pheasant with a side of parsnip puree. It was his way of saying the siege is lifted. Would have thought you'd have held Jasper here until the law took over, I said, settling into my chair. No, Wolfe replied, setting his napkin on his lap. That would imply the law was prepared to handle it. They are not. You don't think Chef Rull will press charges? He might, Wolfe said, but he won't gain from it. Jasper was merely the tool. Strauss was the hand that lifted him. You're saying this was Strauss's play, of course. Delilah funded him. Elaine wavered, but resisted. And Jasper, poor fool, thought he was stepping up to artistry. I still don't get it. I said, why bother poisoning Rull at all if the endgame was just poaching staff for a rival kitchen? Wolfe paused, chewed, and then swallowed before replying. You still think in binary terms, win or lose, guilty or innocent. But in the culinary world, prestige is currency. Strauss couldn't destroy Rull outright. But if Rull were weakened publicly, embarrassed, personally shaken, it would open space. Clients would shift. Critics would circle. Investors would listen. Sabotage by reputation. Precisely. And Strauss knew he couldn't do it from the outside. So he used discontent. On the inside, I leaned back, and Jasper gave him the perfect excuse. Wolfe nodded once. An ambitious pastry chef with no outlet. Add resentment. Remove restraint. And you have a recipe for betrayal. I don't suppose Roll will thank you, I said. I don't require gratitude, Wolfe replied. I require silence. That he got. For the next 2 days, not a single knock at the door. No follow-up visits from Jessup. No letters. No reporters sniffing around. Roll vanished from the gossip rags as quickly as he had entered them. The phrase "unfortunate food reaction" was the only public statement issued by L'Empirene, and it worked like Teflon. By the 3rd day, the restaurant was back to its usual fully booked circus. Jasper's absence was never officially acknowledged, but Saul reported that a new pastry chef had quietly taken over someone imported from Paris. With a glowing resume and no taste for revenge, Elaine stayed on. So did Victor and Clay. Delilah, however, handed in her resignation. No reason given. But Wolfe didn't need one. She served her purpose, he said when I read the report aloud. Strauss will find she has no loyalty to waste. Maybe she just didn't want to stick around a kitchen that almost got turned into a crime scene. Maybe, Wolfe said, but his tone suggested otherwise. On Friday afternoon, the phone rang. Fritz answered. He held the receiver toward the dining room with a look that meant it wasn't a bill collector. "It's Roll," he said. Wolfe didn't sigh. He didn't smile either. He just nodded and took the phone where he sat. "Mr. Roll," he said. "Yes, I see. No, I don't require compensation. You may consider the matter settled." A pause. "No, I do not intend to name the culprit publicly. It is your kitchen. Maintain it as you see fit. Good day." He hung up. That was it. End of conversation. End of case. I waited a beat, then asked, "So we're really just letting it drop?" "It has dropped," Wolfe said. "Had you not noticed?" "Sure," I said. "But what if Strauss tries something again? What if he tries to lure Elaine again? Or Victor?" "That is not our concern," he replied. "We do not operate in anticipation. We respond to insult. This case began when a man brought poison to our threshold. He has left. The threshold is clean. He returned to his book. I watched him for a moment, then stood and wandered out toward the front hall. The brownstone felt unusually calm, and for all Wolfe's talk about ego and appetite, I had to admit he was right. Justice hadn't come in the form of handcuffs or headlines. It came in the form of disassembled alliances, a broken plan, and silence returned to the house. Late that evening, I got a knock at the door. It wasn't Strauss. It was Lionel Jessup, alone, wearing a wool coat to sizes too big and the face of a man who had seen his kitchen run through a blender and now had to pretend it still served foie gras. "I don't expect to be let in," he said, but I needed to say something. I raised an eyebrow. "Shoot." Chef Rule's back on his feet. "The press didn't eat us alive. We've kept our reservation book, and Elaine's agreed to stay on for now." I nodded. "Just wanted you to know," he said. "You and Wolfe, you didn't just solve a problem. You held off a storm." I didn't respond, but I opened the door wider. You want to say that to the man yourself? He hesitated. No, he said. Let him enjoy his peace. Then he turned and walked away. Inside, I closed the door, locked it, and turned the deadbolt for good measure. Back in the dining room, Wolfe looked up briefly. Who was it? No one worth disturbing the peace, I said. He nodded. Fritz, Wolfe called. Bring the pears and the marzipan. It was over. The brownstone was still, and for now, the world outside could keep its poison to itself. You'd think that, after a week of quiet, a man like Nero Wolfe would consider the matter buried, filed, stamped, and boxed with the rest of the sordid little puzzles we've dealt with over the years. But you'd be wrong. Wolfe doesn't believe in open ends. He believes in symmetry. And what we had on our hands, even with the culprit exposed and the kitchen stabilized, was a shape with too many sides still dangling in air dots. So when Wolfe announced, one morning for days after the incident had resolved, that we'd be hosting a formal office gathering after all, I didn't question it. Not much, anyway. The matter is closed, I said as I delivered the mail to his desk. Jasper's vanished. Rule's eating again. Delilah's off sabotaging someone else's Macta D. What's left? Wolfe didn't look up. The residue of ambiguity. English, Gideon Strauss, he said. His role was never illuminated, and the silence from Rule's camp suggests a continued discomfort. I want it ended properly, before someone else gets clever. I had to hand it to Wolfe. He wasn't wrong. Strauss had remained a shadow in the wings through the whole thing. He hadn't acted directly, hadn't showed his face, but his fingerprints had been all over the orchestration. He'd pushed the right people, offered the right promises, and let someone else do the actual seasoning of sabotage. But Strauss hadn't expected Wolfe. That's where the story had pivoted. Now Wolfe wanted. It anchored. So I made the calls. First to Elaine, who accepted with no hesitation. Then Victor, curt and tired sounding, but agreeable. Clay said he'd come if he didn't have to wear a tie. I told him the dress code was barely tolerated. The only one who tried to duck was Roll. Why? He asked over the phone, to finish what was started. I told him, this time in person, with the lights on. He grunted. And what exactly do you plan to finish? Your silence, for one. Pause. I'll come, he said. But I won't play games. Wolfe doesn't play. He moves pieces. Saturday at 11 a.m. They all showed. Elaine came first again. All black. Sharp as a scalpel, and twice as quick on her feet. She barely looked at the others as they filed in. Victor followed, still carrying that weight of disappointment like an old coat he couldn't throw out. Clay arrived late, of course, and spent more time inspecting the ceiling moldings than making eye contact. And then came Roll wearing a tailored coat, a tight scowl, and a forced air of someone pretending this was just a PR meeting and not personal cleanup. Wolfe was waiting in his chair. The rest of the office had been arranged in what Fritz called parlor formation, a semicircle of chairs round Wolfe's desk, each spaced precisely for conversational tension. They all sat. No one spoke, until Wolfe did. This gathering, he said without rising, is not an interrogation. It is a reckoning, Mr. Goodwin, and I have determined that the immediate threat has passed. However, the fracture that permitted it to arise remains. Elaine crossed one leg over the other. Then why not just name Strauss and be done with it? Because he has not been named by those who matter, Wolfe said, and until that happens, his influence remains unpunished. Victor stirred. You want Anton to admit it publicly? No, Wolfe said. I want him to admit it privately. To you, everyone turned toward Roll. He didn't move. Wolfe continued. Each of you suffered in different ways. Mistrust, manipulation, embarrassment. You've worked in a kitchen where ambition festers, where loyalty is measured by silence. That allowed Jasper to act, and it allowed Strauss to reach him. Rule's fingers tapped the armrest. He was weak. Roll said finally. He was exploited, Wolfe corrected, by someone you once mentored. Rule's gaze darkened. Strauss is nothing. He was a student who mistook mimicry for mastery. And yet, Wolfe said, he nearly toppled your kitchen from the shadows. Elaine spoke next. Why does it matter? Wolfe, we're still standing. The restaurant survived. Jasper's gone. Delilah left. The rest of us stayed. Wolfe nodded. But what remains unspoken still controls you. Clay was used. Victor was compromised. You were courted, and none of you have confronted it. Clay scoffed. So we're here to, what? Hug it out? No, Wolfe said. You are here to reclaim your domain, not from Jasper, from the doubt he left behind. I watched Rule's eyes shift across the room. He saw them now not as staff, but as people who'd nearly turned away, and not one of them met his gaze with anything close to reverence. He cleared his throat. When Gideon left, he said slowly, I didn't chase him. He claimed I'd stolen something, a menu, an idea. He was wrong, but I didn't fight it. I let him rage, and then he disappeared into second-rate kitchens and self-promotion. Until now, Elaine said. Until now. Roll echoed. He used you. All of you. He knew I wouldn't admit weakness. Knew I'd stay silent. That's my fault. Victor blinked. Elaine's lips tightened. Clay actually looked up. Wolfe leaned back. There, he said, the silence is broken. No one replied. They didn't need to. 10 minutes later, they left. No fireworks. No fanfare. But this time, the quiet felt earned. I stayed behind to tidy. At the office, Wolfe stayed in his chair, eyes closed, fingers steepled. Fritz brought in a small tray of sliced apples and soft cheese, which he accepted without comment. That's it, then? I asked. It is, Wolfe replied. The wine was poisoned. The air has been cleared. You think Strauss will try again? No, he said. Strauss has no soldiers left. I stood in the window and watched Roll walk alone toward the corner, shoulders square, pace unhurried. Not triumphant, but steady. Back inside. Wolfe reached for his cheese, closed the folder on his desk, and tapped it once with finality. Conscience, he said, is best restored not by punishment, but by understanding. I grinned. You sure you don't want that engraved somewhere? No, he said. I prefer pears. It wasn't over. Not for Wolfe. The office gathering had smoothed egos and stitched a few frayed hems on a torn kitchen staff. But it hadn't scratched the real itch that had been bugging Wolfe since the day Jessup walked through our front door with that perfectly knotted tie and the stench of panic hanging off him like cologne. Wolfe had exposed the method and maneuvered the suspects, sure, but there was still a piece on the board. He hadn't cornered Strauss, the prodigal menace, the puppet master who never stepped into the light, and Wolfe hated dangling strings. So, when I found him late Sunday evening not reading, not tending to orchids, not sampling Fritz's smoked trout, but just sitting there, thinking I knew the case had sprouted one final root that needed pulling. He waited until I set down the tray of chocolate wafers before speaking. Mr. Strauss, he said, believes himself immune because we let him walk. No, Wolfe replied, because we never summoned him. Same difference. No, it isn't. I leaned against the edge of the desk. So summon him now. Wolfe shook his head. Too late. He won't come. Not now. Not when he thinks he's won the long game. I frowned. Won what? Jasper's gone. Rule's still in charge. Delilah's off the chessboard, and Elaine didn't jump ship. Strauss never intended to steal them all, just enough to tilt the perception. The poisoning was secondary. A flourish. His real game was doubt. Dismantle the perception of Rule's invincibility and the market shifts. Strauss repositions. I folded my arms. And what stops him from doing it again? His exposure, Wolfe said simply. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years. The office recording log. Dusty, but still functional. Wolfe hated technology, but when he used it, it was always surgical. You bugged the gathering, I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked if he kept mustard in his wine cellar. Of course not. But I recorded the call from Gideon Strauss to Jasper Quan. Or rather, Sol did. 3 days before the poisoning, on a private line routed through a dummy server, forwarded through a VoIP service tied to a real estate shell in Jersey. We found it. That stopped me, and you sat on it. I needed to understand it, Wolfe said. The voice is his, calm, persuasive. He never orders, never instructs, but he suggests. Imagine if Anton were taken down a peg. Just one. Just enough to make others ask questions. It's all there, framed in ambition, wrapped in plausible deniability. Why hold it now? Because now it matters, Wolfe said. Now it concludes. He passed me a copy of the transcript. I scanned it. Strauss had played the long con like a conductor, timing, tension, no fingerprints. Still not criminal, I said. No, Wolfe agreed, but unethical. And once presented to the right ears, damaging. He handed me an envelope to be delivered, he said, to Chefral, sealed. I raised an eyebrow. What's in it? Just the transcript and a note. He'll know what to do. I took the envelope and made the delivery myself. Roll didn't say much when I handed it over, just gave a nod, slid it into his coat, and returned to barking at someone about torching the creme brulee too early. 2 days passed. On Wednesday morning, The newspapers ran a quiet column buried on page 9 of the city table. Chef Gideon Strauss departs from venture kitchen, cites health. No scandal, no fire, no smoke. But Strauss was out, pulled from a prime reservation project with a mystery investor. No explanation given. The industry took note, as it always does. Wolfe didn't comment. He just had Fritz prepare trout almondine, with a side of smug. That evening, roll called, again. This time, he asked for a short meeting. Wolfe, curious despite himself, agreed. At 5 o'clock sharp, Rull entered the office, alone, carrying a bottle wrapped in velvet and a look that could only be described as respectful, or something close enough. He didn't sit until Wolfe gestured. "I read the transcript," Rull said. "I took steps, quiet ones." Wolfe nodded. "I owe you thanks," Rull added. "You owe yourself honesty." Wolfe replied, "You merely let pride bury you." Again, Rull didn't argue. Instead, he pulled the velvet from the bottle. La Tatch, 1937, an authentic one this time. Wolfe stared at it. "You wish me to drink it?" "No," Rull said. "I want you to store it, to keep it safe, because I know now that I shouldn't." Wolfe almost smiled. Almost. Rull left 10 minutes later, without fanfare. I watched him go and said, "Never thought I'd see that guy hand over a bottle without tasting it first." Humility, Wolfe said, is not a natural seasoning, but effective when applied with restraint. I chuckled. "You gonna drink it?" "No," Wolfe said, "but I may smell the cork." And just like that, the case that had started with a poisoned ego and a stolen bottle ended with the rarest wine in the world sitting unopened in our cabinet. Sealed. Like the case itself. Wolfe leaned back, full, fed, and finally silent. And in that moment, the brownstone held the rarest thing of all peace. You'd think wrapping up a case like this, the kind with poisoned wine, whispered sabotage, and more knives and backs than in kitchens, would come with a sense of closure. A grand gesture, something cinematic. But when you work with Nero Wolfe, resolution isn't a standing ovation. It's quiet, tidy, almost rude in how little it asks for acknowledgement. That bottle of La Tatch sat unopened on the sideboard for a week. Wolfe didn't so much as touch it. He'd glance at it during dinner, maybe wrinkle his nose at the idea of sentimentality, then return to his plate. I suggested auctioning it quietly, of course, with Saul's contacts. He shot that down like I'd proposed serving spaghetti from a can. "It's not to be profited from," Wolfe said. "Its purpose is served," which was to remind me, he said, that even mastery spoils when mishandled. Cryptic, even for him. Meanwhile, the dust settled elsewhere. Elaine Mortar accepted the promotion she'd long deserved. Not head chef or wasn't that evolved, but something close enough to let her build her own menu segment. Victor got tighter inventory protocols and a second set of eyes in the cellar. Clay was removed from wine access entirely, which likely saved both his pride and the restaurant's insurance premiums. And Strauss still vanished. His departure from Venture Kitchen was handled like a state secret. Industry gossip suggested medical leave, But the knowing glances told the real story. Something went wrong, and someone powerful made it disappear. Funny thing about sabotage, it leaves no fingerprints, but it stains everything else. One morning, a small white box showed up at the brownstone's door with no return label. Fritz opened it and found inside an envelope addressed to Wolfe and a tray of chocolate truffles, neatly arranged and wrapped in gold foil. There was a note. No one will ever know what you did, except me, and that's enough. J.K. Jasper. Quan. Not a confession, not an apology, just acknowledgement. Wolfe didn't react. He ordered Fritz to remove the truffles and incinerate the box. I don't accept sweets from traitors, he said. Even when wrapped in gold, I asked, especially then. But that wasn't the final curtain. Not yet. 1 week after Strauss's name vanished from every menu in the city, Lionel Jessup reappeared on our stoop, wearing the same carefully knotted tie and half the nervous sweat he'd arrived with the first time. I opened the door. We don't do loyalty check-ins. I'm not here for Wolfe, Jessup said. I'm here for you. That was new. He followed me inside and waited in the front room while I poked my head into the office. Visitor for me, I told Wolfe. Then handle him, he replied without looking up. So I did. Jessup handed me a folder. Chef Raoul has approved a private security audit for the kitchen. Internal protocols, vetting access, new passcodes, the works. Let me guess, I said. He wants you to ask us. Jessup smiled. No, I want to ask you. Why? Because whatever Wolfe is, you're the one who moved, who listened, who asked questions no one else could. I opened the folder. A blank contract. Standard terms. Discreet consultation. Wolfe wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot poker. But me, well, I didn't mind getting my shoes dirty. Tell Raoul I'll think about it, I said. Handing the folder back, Jessup nodded. He won't thank you. He already has, in silence. Later that evening, I brought it up over dinner. Wolfe was halfway through a plate of duck eel orange and not feeling chatty. They want me to handle a security overhaul, I said. Casually. No, Wolfe replied. I'm not asking your permission. You are asking for my approval. He set down his fork. Go, he said, but return each evening. I do not wish to dine alone. You're capable of it. I'm capable of many unpleasant things. I choose not to indulge them, so I took the job. 3 days a week, in and out of that kitchen, tightening screws, mapping blind spots, interviewing staff with the finesse of a MacD and the curiosity of a homicide detective. It was good work, honest, for once, and no one got poisoned. One afternoon, as I was finishing an inventory walkthrough, Elaine stopped me near the staff locker room. She looked tired but lighter, like someone who'd fought through the heat and come out flame-proof. You were right about Jasper, she said. I didn't answer. He was always good, but never great. Strauss sold him a shortcut. Raoul let him. Believe it. Not your fault, I said. No, she agreed. But I saw it happening. I didn't stop it. Next time, I said. You will? She nodded once, and that was the end of it. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had resumed his full dinner routines. No interruptions, no case files, just books, orchids, and the humming of Fritz in the kitchen. The Lartach bottle remained unopened, a mute testament to the case we'd buried without headlines. One night, while clearing the office, I glanced at it and said, "You ever gonna crack it open?" "No," Wolfe replied. "Why keep it?" "As proof." He said. "Of what?" He looked up from his book. "That even poison," he said, "can be beautiful in the right bottle." And that was that. Case closed. Not with a bang. Not with justice, but with peace. And a meal worth remembering. The thing about wrapping up a case in Nero Wolfe's orbit is that there's no drumroll, no kiss-off line, no final swell of music as the credits roll. You don't get confetti when justice is served. What you get is a quiet house, a sharp mind at peace, and a sense that balance, whatever crooked shape it takes, has been restored. It had been 3 weeks since the last ripple from the Rull affair. The kitchen had stabilized. Strauss was out of the spotlight and off the chessboard. Elaine was running her section with a calm authority Rull hadn't seen coming. Clay was still employed, though now under strict supervision and a lockbox inventory system that didn't trust anyone under 40. Victor had restructured the cellar, added new security procedures, and hadn't misplaced so much as a cork since as for Rull himself. Word on the grapevine was that he'd softened. Not much, but enough. He'd cut back his public appearances, refocused on the menu, and according to a pastry chef I met on the loading dock had started asking his staff for input on plating. That alone was more shocking than the poison. Meanwhile, back at the brownstone, the bottle remained unopened. Wolfe didn't mention it, neither did I. But it sat there like a case file you don't throw away, not because you'll need it again, but because you want to remember what it cost to close. One Friday evening, while I was scanning a stack of unread invoices, Wolfe broke his long-standing silence about the case. "Archie," he said, eyes still on his book, "why do you suppose Quan sent the truffles?" I looked up. "Guilt." "No," Wolfe replied. "Acknowledgement." "Of what?" "That he was seen. That his failure was understood before it was condemned." "Same difference." "No," Wolfe said. "Most men would rather be hated than forgotten." Jasper knew his ambition outpaced his ethics, but he wanted someone to know it wasn't all malice. He thought he was rising. Instead, he fell. I said. Wolfe nodded. "Precisely. And Strauss? He didn't care whether Jasper burned. Only that Anton stumbled." I tossed the last invoice onto the table. "So, what's the moral?" "There is none," Wolfe said. "Except perhaps that arrogance is a poor substitute for clarity. Not exactly one for the storybooks." "No," he agreed. "But stories mislead. They end too neatly." He stood, which meant dinner was ready. Fritz had prepared something indulgent saddle of lamb with rosemary glaze, a potato gratin that could make grown men cry, and a spiced fig compote Wolfe had been craving. 4 days. The dining room was quiet, silver gleaming, napkins folded like origami. Halfway through the meal, Wolfe surprised me again. "Have you considered keeping the Rull contract?" "You mean staying on?" I asked. 3 days a week. wandering through stainless steel back rooms with bad lighting and worse tempers. He looked at me, and I saw something that caught me off guard. Not need, permission. You enjoy the movement, he said. The color, the exposure. It feeds you. I also enjoy breathing. Then be selective, but take it. I didn't. Respond. Not right away. The wine that evening wasn't La Tache. It was something modest Pinot Noir. French, but not fussy. Wolfe swirled it once, sniffed, sipped. Then, without looking up, he said, "You may sell the bottle." I blinked. The La Tache? Yes. Quietly, discreetly. Donate the proceeds to Jasper, to someone who won't waste them. Fritz entered with dessert pear tart. Flaky and warm, and Wolfe leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Outside, the city pulsed as it always did. Inside, the world was still, order restored. Case concluded. Another attempt at betrayal, past, dissected, and filed away by a man who never left his chair. And another round of footwork, sweat, and strategy delivered by yours truly. They never see us coming, but they never forget when we've passed through. That's the thing about Wolfe. He doesn't chase storms. He waits for them to walk in the door. And when they do, he serves them neatly, firmly, and with a side of truth. Bon appetit.